Hi, welcome to Infinite Leaders Live. I'm Lewis Keynes, and our why is simple: to be better educators and to be better humans. We want to support and encourage infinite learning for everyone, regardless of their rank, role, or responsibility, and hopefully for everybody to be willing to learn and to listen and to get better as a result. I'm joined as ever by my pal Alan, and Alan, we're looking forward to this one, aren't we?
Yeah, can't wait. Thanks, Lewis. Really looking forward to diving deeper into understanding how leaders with an infinite mindset translate this across to their teams. We want to focus on the things you don't get taught at university or on any courses, real life lessons from real life people with real life experience.
And we're learning as we go through this. As ever, we record live, and I'm sure there'll be a few mistakes as we go. We do believe in what we're doing, and we want to get better as well. We'd love your feedback, so please get in touch if there's anything you think we can do a little bit better, or anything that you enjoy on our podcast today. You can find us on Instagram, on YouTube. Alan and I are on Twitter, and also at theinfinitelearners.com. And our podcast is now available on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So please listen, learn, and share. And Alan, let's crack on.
Get your pens and paper ready, guys. There's going to be some absolute gems of wisdom coming out of the show today. We're delighted to welcome Professor Damian Hughes onto the show, and he combines his practical and academic background within sport, organisation and change psychology to work as a trusted advisor to the business, education and sporting elite, specialising in the creation of high-performing cultures. And we're massive fans of the High Performance podcast that he co-hosts with Jake Humphrey. He's the author of numerous books: The Barcelona Way, Liquid Thinking, Liquid Leadership, How to Change Absolutely Anything, How to Think Like Alex Ferguson, and the book I've got here at the moment, the 5 Steps to the Winning Mindset, in addition to 3 acclaimed sports biographies of Sugar Ray Robinson, Thomas Hearns and Marvin Hagler. He's used to working with the Premier League, and today he's working here with the Sunday League. So, bit of a change today. So, Damian, we know from your STEPS model, you like to tell stories. Can you tell us about your journey growing up in Manchester?
Yeah, of course. Well, listen, first of all, from my point of view, thank you for the invitation to come on. I'm a huge admirer of your work and the difference that you're trying to make. So thank you. It's a real privilege to be asked. So my background is, I'm a lad from North Manchester. So I had an unusual background in terms of I grew up in a boxing gym. So my playground was a boxing gym in the north of the city. So before I was even born, my dad had set up this gym in an area called Collyhurst, which is like a lot of boxing gyms. They are often located in sort of the poorer, more deprived areas of the city, and that's what Collyhurst is. At one stage, it was categorised as Europe's 3rd poorest district. But I knew nothing else from that young age, so that was where I grew up. And there's so many things that subsequently, I think, as you become an adult, and I've gone down the academic route, one of the phrases we often talk about is we don't do research, we do me-search, where you try and understand a bit about your own background and your own biography. I think there's so many things that, in retrospect, I took for granted that I can now understand just how powerful the lessons were around it. So I was around world-class athletes. I was around guys preparing to go to Olympic Games, boxing for world titles at that young age. But more importantly than that, what's really intrigued me in the years since is just how powerful the culture was. So as I say, it was from quite a deprived background in terms of a lot of the sort of social and economic problems that beset the area. But this particular gym, it wasn't about teaching people boxing. It was about creating a sanctuary where people could just cross that threshold and come into a place that was almost a sanctuary from some of the challenges of lives, especially for a lot of the young kids there. So many of those kids never set foot in a boxing ring. But I'll give you a nice sort of coda to it that my dad's quite poorly now. And 3 years ago, Manchester Council named a road after him in the area of the city in sort of tribute to the 50 years that he'd done there and the difference he'd made. And when they did it, there was about 300 people turned up, and I would say 90% of them never boxed in any way, shape or form. But what they did was they turned up and spoke very much around the impact that that gym had on their lives and some of the lessons that they taught them that they took into their own professional and personal lives. So really simple example I'll give you that might be of relevance for education is that you just weren't allowed to swear. So when you cross that threshold of coming into the club, you just weren't allowed to use bad language. And it wasn't some kind of moral thing of being offended by bad language. The way that it was explained to people was that if you don't have the self-discipline not to use bad language and keep your mouth shut rather than use an F word or start carrying on like that, that would indicate a lack of discipline. And in a boxing gym, a lack of discipline is likely to get you hurt at some stage in the ring. So it was only ever linked to the behaviour of discipline that you have to have the discipline to keep your mouth shut, just as you have to have the discipline in the ring. So there was something that I've come to call trademark behaviours that define the culture in that environment, that people just intuitively came to learn and understand that could help them. So the amount of kids that were taught that, listen, if you go into a job interview and you start effing and blinded, the world just closes its doors on you. You don't want to hear somebody speaking like that without understanding the context. So a lot of these kids, when they came a few years ago for the road naming, were talking about how lessons like that had helped them make a difference in their own lives and their own communities as well. So I feel incredibly blessed that I grew up in that environment and almost knew nothing else around it. But I went down the route of coaching. My dad, because people often say, "Oh, what did you box?" And it was one of those things that, like, you play football, you play rugby, but you just box. You don't play it. It's too brutal a sport to play at. And my dad was adamant that if you didn't have a level of aptitude and skill, you didn't do it because you could get yourself badly hurt in it. And he would advise so many kids of that just come and do it for fitness, but you're not going to box and hurt yourself with this. So my dad realised I was useless at boxing, is what I'm trying to say. But he said to me, "You better go down the academic route," which is what I did. So I was a coach, so I worked in the corner of the fights, and I grew to love the boxing. But I went down the academic route, and 10 years ago now, I got my professorship. So I'm now visiting professor at the uni, which allows me to do lots of other things as well. But it's very much in that area of organisational psychology and change. And a lot of it is about helping take the principles of how do you create high-performing cultures and introduce them.
Yeah, love the journey, Damian. I myself and Lewis are from similar backgrounds. We're counsellors, kids who've done all right. We've gone into a little bit of academic. How did you get yourself involved with academia, coming from that sort of culture of a counsellor state, and you've got your boss?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I felt very lucky that, I was lucky that I had parents that. So, my dad was. I'll give you a bit of context to him because it'll explain what I'm about to say. That he was born as an illegitimate child in post-war Catholic Manchester.
Yeah.
And the reason I give you that is that it was a real stigma for him, and he'd been stigmatized all his life that he never knew his dad and things like that. And I think that where he left school at 14 and he was illiterate. Now, as we grew up, he taught himself to read and write, and he loved reading. And there's a Nelson Mandela quote that, education is the window to the world, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And my dad had sort of done that he was almost self-educated. And him and my mum really, really valued the power of education for us. So we were really encouraged on that. And again, we're very lucky that we were nurtured and encouraged. So when I was 11, I got a scholarship to go to a grammar school, which was, like when you look at those sliding doors moments of your lives and you look back at it and go, actually, that was really powerful for me, because I got put into an environment where I really got stretched, but nurtured, which I think is what all great educational establishments do. So there's a nice story to it that it didn't feel nice at the time, but I felt like a proper fish out of water when I got to this school. and the first couple of years were really difficult, and I ended up getting expelled for fighting. Wow. And when I think back on it, it was because it was just my way of trying to sort of fit in and establish myself, and I didn't know any other way than being like that. When I was like cornered, you come out. I was coming out fighting, and I remember sat in the headmaster's office because there was a pattern of this, and he just said to me, "We can't have this. You're here on a scholarship, and you're carrying on like this. It's unacceptable," which it was. And he booted me out. And I remember sat there thinking, now I was fortunate, my dad was away in Switzerland with a lad boxing. So I knew I had a couple of days grace before I was going to get hammered for it. And I sat there and I said to him, I said, I'm in big trouble here and I'm really sorry. So they sent me home. Now, what had also happened was, this next bit sounds a bit random, but I'll explain it. I was an altar boy as well at the local Catholic church where we was. Now, these images of being a lad that was coming in and fighting and being aggressive and then serving on an altar on a Sunday just didn't add up. And there was a really strict teacher from our school came in about 2 months before I'd got expelled, and he'd seen me on the altar, and he called me into his office the next day, and he was like, "What?" He was trying to square the circle of, how's a lad like that that's carrying on like this and he's always in trouble, being an altar boy. And then he found out a bit more about my family, and he met my mum and dad, and he knew that I was like from a nice family, even if I wasn't behaving nice. So when they booted me out, this teacher, a man called Bernard Council, came round to our house that night, and he spoke to my mum because my dad was away. And he said, "Listen, I'm prepared to stand up for him at school, and I'm going to see what I can do to get him back. But I need some guarantees that he's going to behave himself." So obviously I knew I'd sort of gone to the brink. And this teacher, this Mr. Council, went to the headmaster and he got it changed from an expulsion to a suspension. And again, it's one of those things that he had no reason to do that. And I mean, he's 85 now, and I still I'd still keep in touch with him, send him presents at Christmas, and I try and take him out once a year just for something to eat, because I just think that's the power of teachers. That's like that man, Mr. Council. He saw something in me long before I saw something, and he knew that I wasn't a bad lad. I was just a bit out of my depth. I had no other way of articulating or expressing my frustration, and he was prepared to back me. Do you know what I mean? He put his own reputation on the line. That I just think, what an amazing thing to do to make a difference to a kid's life. And I feel a bit of an obligation to people like Bernard Council, that this is like 35 years ago, but this is a man that had no reason to want to back me and still had the grace to do it, which to me was a really seminal moment. So when I'd gone down the route, so when I got my professorship, there was a bit of a fuss in like the Manchester papers where they'd run like an article on you, like local lad and things like that. And I mentioned this Mr. Council in the article, and to my shame, I hadn't been in touch for a while, but he got in touch with me. And it was one of those moments that like I could easily now cry when I think about it, because when we got back in touch and things like that, you go, you know what, you changed my life, and it's really nice that I can acknowledge that and just thank you for having the grace to just help somebody when there was no reason that you had to do that. So yeah, that was very much my background. So I felt really lucky that I got into an environment that wasn't just prepared to wash their hands of me, but stretched me as well and really sort of pushed me down those routes.
Wow, the power of a teacher. It's an incredible story.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I think like the work you, and that's why when you were kind enough to invite me on, it was like, well, you know what, you guys are making a difference, and you're doing it because you want to give tools and techniques to people that are in the similar boat that can make a difference to them as well. So that's why I said to you, I really admire what you're doing, because I'm the recipient of teachers like you that care, that are passionate, and that want to change lives.
Cheers, Damian. That's really kind of you to say. Going back to what you were talking about there, of being in a school and having that kind of feeling that you didn't quite belong there, and the altar boy versus thug on the playground fighting. There's And we've talked about a few times, Alan and I, on this podcast about imposter syndrome. And I know in your book you give that a name. What's your? God, I've read it about 12 times. I forget it every time.
There you go, Alan. Yeah.
To tell us a little bit about that. It sounds like that's a real thing. Second behind only a spider phobia in the UK as the biggest phobia, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's often the case of like you say, like, what am I doing here? What's it got to do with me? I'd like why me is often the question that a lot of people will find themselves asking, and then, but then the question is like when you were talking about setting up this this podcast, you go, well, why not you? You know what I mean? Who else is doing it? Why shouldn't you do that? Like, I know, Alan, you said you'd like counsel estate lads from Sheffield. Well, why not? Well, why not you? You know, I often think of that quote from Ian Brown, I think it was, in the Stone Roses, where they went, well, it's not where you're from, it's where you're at. You know what I mean? And it's like, judge somebody for the person they are, not where they're from, or make a judgment on what you think people from that area are like. Judge them for what you can see in front of them. Are they decent people? Are they kind? Are they caring? Are they generous? And then make a judgment after that, I think is something that I suppose you date it back to those moments at my school in terms of teachers treating me like that. But yeah, so I got there, and like I say, I came from a family that really valued education, but I'd never been lucky enough to particularly receive an education. So I suppose just getting there, and I was on a scholarship. There was all kinds of things that I suppose I couldn't have articulated at 11 or 12, but it was imposter syndrome, and I just felt the pressure to try and find your own identity. You know what I mean? And for me, the easiest identity was to be the aggressive Doug on the playground and to be the idiot in the classroom, because that way at least you've got an identity. And like I say, it was teachers that just went, you're better than that. You don't need to behave like that. You know, like there's a better way here that was really quite seminal for me. Well, for me, certainly.
Fast forwarding through a good few years, you yourself has done some incredible work with some huge names in sport, and the time you've spent at some really successful teams. How did you cope with that kind of feeling as you got older? You know, being again that boy who was in trouble for fighting and not quite belonging or feeling like you belong in that place.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really good question. I suppose I go into environments now where if you started throwing your weight around and fighting, you get a good hiding. So, so I think that's good in terms of sort of getting you to wind your neck in. But a more serious answer is, I suppose, I was going to say as I've grown older, but I don't think it's a case of it just happens because you grow older. I think it requires you to really reflect on this, because you can grow older and not change. But I think just understanding very much what your core values are, and therefore how that manifests itself as behaviours, means that whoever you're meeting and whatever environment you're going into, if you're being true to those values and behaviours, it gives you a sense of confidence that can overcome that imposter syndrome. So what I mean by that is, like I say it to I'm blessed to have two young children that are 11 and 7, and I say this to them, that I have 3 values in many ways that guide you. Just be kind, caring, and sharing. And then if you can go into an environment where you can demonstrate those behaviours, that's where you think, well, at least I'm being true to myself, you know, and being congruent. And if you're in an environment where you don't feel those behaviours can manifest themselves, well, maybe it's not the right place for you. And to think of it in that way. So you almost go back to that bedrock of, can you be true to yourself and those values that you've been brought up with? And then, you know, if you can do that and then you do your best in that environment, and if your best isn't good enough, but you behave like yourself, well, come away from it and be satisfied. I mean, I'll give you an example. You mentioned this podcast that I've been working on, and only this week I did an interview with Dina Masher-Smith, and I was talking to her. It was a different context, but it was effectively the same question that you've just asked, where I said to her, how do you go into some of these like World Championships or Olympic Games and go in there knowing that some of your rivals are cheating and doping and all kinds of and things that you just have no idea of? And her answer was reassuring for me, because she went, you know what, I can only do my best, so I can only be true to my own values that my parents and my coaches have brought me up with. And then I can go out there and I can do my absolute best. But she said, I don't focus on winning a gold medal, because if I do that and somebody has been doing something that illegal, that means that they come out there rocket powered to win a gold medal, why would I come away disappointed with myself if I've just done my best? So my focus isn't on a gold medal. It's just about turning out and representing the true version of me, which I thought was a really powerful way of articulating it. Of just don't get caught up in what other people are doing, because you've got no idea of what their journey is. So you can only go in and be true to yourself. You know, like I know you guys are going to new schools, and I'm sure that's what you'll do when you go into it. You're going into a new environment, meeting new people. You just want them to see the real version of you, don't you? And then that way, if that's not enough, well, there's nothing you can do about it. You're not going to perform and become a different person for them.
We're going to ask you about that, Damian, actually. Purely in a selfish note, and also many leaders across the world starting new positions in August, September time. Just put yourself in our context there. What would you do? What's the first thing you do when you're going into a new situation as a leader? A little bit of advice there for us, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Listen. Just listen. There's I often think that one of the big things that you go into is go in with the idea of what are you doing well around here. So go in with that question of what are you brilliant at? What do you do better than any other school I've ever been into? Who are the people here that are just driving standards that are fantastic? And I think when you go in to environments like that and you start asking the question of what's going well, as opposed to a lot of people going in and going, well, what's wrong with this place? How can I make an impact? I think you start from that idea of what's going well. I often call it, when I work with teams, and it's a simple exercise, success leaves clues. You say, start looking for where the environment or your department is successful. Because what you're finding there is, if you want confidence, confidence comes from evidence. So find the evidence of what works really well. And then on the basis of that, say, how do we do more of it? How can I help you accentuate or do even more of what you're already doing well? So you start to build momentum quite quickly based on some of the successful principles there. So often I can imagine if you go in as leaders, you have an instinct that I want to make my mark here. I want to come in and find out how I can improve it. You know, which is part of the reason you've come in and having spoken to you both, you've got that desire to make a difference. So our instinct sometimes is, how can I go in and build on and make a difference? The easiest way to do it is make a difference on what they're already doing well, accentuate the positives of it.
Yeah.
Now, there's two reasons why I'd suggest that's an approach to do. First of all, it's an inclusive exercise. So you want to get to know your new department, the inclusivity of saying, what are you good at? So people think, oh, they're not having a crack at me. They're not coming here to expose what I can't do. They're coming here to ask me what I can do and what I'm already doing well. So there's an inclusivity on that. But then it's the second thing is you're getting tangible evidence of what's already existed. You're not building in a vacuum. You're building on the foundation stones that you've inherited.
Yes, really powerful messages. And the listen one for me, there's the big one. You just got to go in and you got to listen, haven't you? And you've got to see.
Well, there's a lovely stat, Alan, that might be of interest to you. That years ago they did a study in American med schools about doctors that got sued the most versus doctors that got sued the least. And the reason they did this was they were worried about levels of litigation, and they wanted to start influencing the next generation of doctors. So they wanted to get into medical schools and start to understand the differences. And in this massive study they did, the only real difference between the levels of litigation, those that were sued the most versus the least, was length of appointment times. So it had nothing to do with how knowledgeable you were as a doctor, nothing to do with the quality of advice you were dispensing. It came down to appointment times. And the difference was that the doctors that had the highest levels of litigation, those that were sued the most, their average appointment time was 15 minutes. Doctors that got sued the least, their average appointment time was 18.5 minutes. So you're not even talking massive amounts of time difference. It was 3.5 minutes difference. So you go, well, why is that significant? And if you think about it, you imagine you go and see a doctor and he's got to give you some bad news. The first instinct you have is you go into your own head, you panic, you go, yeah, what? And so bad doctors just keep talking at you. Good doctors just learn to listen, just shut up. You have a phrase in the medical community of be comfortable with those uncomfortable moments. Just stay with you. And then eventually the patient will say, what's my choices? What do I do next? And they've invited you back into the conversation. So you have to stay in those moments just to get the real difference where you can make it. So like you say, you go into a new school and just say, what are you good at? And then just have the ability to let them talk, let them tell you, because they will want to tell you. They'll want to impress you as much as you want to impress them, I'm sure.
Yeah, really powerful.
I really like that idea about, being invited back into the conversation, and being quiet for long enough for somebody to ask you a question that gets you back into there. I think that's really cool. Just touching on some of, obviously, the work that you've done through the years, where have you found the most success in that? Have you got examples of that, of people that you've worked with or alongside?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've been in a number of elite environments, worked with a lot of elite coaches and seen them enjoy success. The reason I hesitate in my answer to you, Lewis, is that I often feel that my position is an easy one to be a bit disingenuous about. So when you say I've been in environments that have been successful, yeah, I have, but I would question how much I contributed to that. I feel like I've been a witness to it rather than an architect of it. Because I often say, if I make 1% difference to a team or an environment, I'm probably still over-exaggerating my own importance. Because what I've seen from so many of these environments is it's about good coaches and creating good environments for good people to come and blossom. And I think you could use that same term for education as well. It's about good teachers creating good teaching environments for good students to learn. And there's no silver bullet to it. Do you know what I mean? So I often serve as, like you said in the introduction, like a trusted advisor. And I think that's it. I think working with the leaders and the coaches is where the real power lies for me, that you can be another pair of eyes and ears for them, that you can advise them, but you work in the shadows, but they're the ones with the credibility to be able to go and implement and create the environment that they really want. So I'll give you a bit of an incongruous example, just because it's long enough ago now that you can look at it even with hindsight and understand the impact that we had. So one of the early environments I went to work in was a rugby league club, where I was really good friends with the head coach, and when he got the role, he invited me to come in. So rugby league, for those people listening, is it was described by a journalist once as being the last truly working class sport in the UK, where it's an interesting environment that a lot of the fans come from working class communities, the players tend to come from the working class communities, and it tends to be enjoyed by the working class communities. It doesn't tend to travel that well outside of the north of England or out in Australia where it's their national sport. But it's a brilliant environment. I really enjoyed it. And my mate was the head coach at a club called Warrington Wolves. Now, to give some context, because I'm not from a rugby league background, so I felt that was a help when I did it. But we went into a club where it hadn't won a trophy for, I think it was 35 years, but it was being bankrolled by a local lad that had made good. And my mate, a guy called Tony Smith, an Australian coach, had been brought in to come and turn it around. And I was lucky enough to go in with Tony. Now, over the next 5 years that I worked there, and this is a bit where I sound like a fraud because I'm trying to attribute it to me being there, and it wasn't. But they won the Challenge Cup 3 times. We got to grand final twice. and won the league twice, I think it was. And the interesting thing was we did it with 90% of the players that we inherited. So it's not like football where it's a buy and sell culture, because it's a relatively poor sport. You have to work with the resources you've got. And in that 5-year period, I felt that one of the big factors that changed within it was the environment and the culture, that we worked really hard on creating it, where those guys could come in and thrive within the environment rather than feel that they were being stifled or they had to behave or conform in a certain way. So it had a reputation long before I'd gone in as being a bit of a party club, where there was all kinds of sort of allegations that were often labelled against them. Some of them were a little bit morally repugnant, if I'll just leave it at that without getting myself into trouble. But there were certain things that were going on there that were really questionable for any environment, let alone elite athletic culture. But yeah, I felt like we did a lot of work which was about identifying our cultural architects. These are the leaders without title in the dressing room, really good people that wanted to make a difference, working with them and helping them have the confidence to stand up and change the culture, working with the coaching staff to get them to understand the importance of behaviours as well as results. So it wasn't just about winning games, it was about winning it in the right way. So driving for that consistency. So helping people adapt to change, all of those kind of things was what I felt like it was a real playground for me to go and work within. So I'll give you a really simple example, right? That one of our trademark behaviours of this environment was, we said, if we're going to win, we need to do things differently than others. So we need to be to take risks. So one of our trademarks was, you do take risks, you play on the edge. And I remember 18 months when we were into this environment, we got to a semi-final of a grand final, which was where you played the final at Old Trafford. And one of our players took a risk in the last minute. We were just behind, and he threw the ball out from behind his back to try and beat the defence. And the opposition spotted what he did, caught the ball, ran down the field and knocked us out in the last minute of a semi-final. And honestly, the atmosphere was just like a balloon being deflated. Everyone was devastated and there was desolation. And I remember, I often say this to people, that I got paid to do nothing virtually all that season, but I earned my money in the 5 minutes after the final whistle, because the coaching staff were devastated and furious at what this guy had done. And that was the moment where I had to stand in their way and say, I don't think you need to go down to the dressing room yet. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, if I was you, when you get to that dressing room, just send everybody home. Do not do any analysis or review of the game. And part of the reason why, and we explained this in hindsight, but they listened to me and they trusted me enough to go, okay, fine, was that I said, we've been preaching over the last 18 months that one of our key behaviours is to take a risk. And somebody's done that tonight and it's not come off. So if you go down and you lambast them for taking a risk, you're just about to undo the last 18 months worth of work and messages that we've done. Because what you're now going to say is, we want you to take a risk as long as it comes off, which by definition isn't a risk. So almost give yourself a bit of time just to go away, reflect on it and come back tomorrow morning. And when they came back the next morning, they said, okay, it didn't come off, but we appreciate what you were trying to do. And they were able to respond in a calm and more measured way, which meant that the players didn't get confused with the ambiguity of our message. They didn't feel that we were hypocrites. They didn't feel that we were saying one thing as long as we were winning. We just were consistent regardless of the outcome. That behaviour was still non-negotiable in our environment. Now, there's a nice end to that story that 12 months after this, we ended up winning the Challenge Cup at Wembley. And the guy that had made the mistake of taking that risk ended up being our man of the match and gave like a proper heroic performance in it. And that's why I'm offering the example, because I'm far enough away now that you can see the start and end of that journey, if you like, rather than being in the middle of it. But that was a really powerful environment to go into and learn, because I think the other thing that it really taught me as well is, coming from a more academic background, was that going into an environment and start using words like allodoxophobia with these lads from the estates, from where they were coming from, you'd have got a smack in the mouth for it. That they just, they'd have either responded like that, or they'd have just got up and walked out of the room, like, because they'd have felt you were patronising them or trying to be a smart ass. And it was just a brilliant way of actually teaching you, keep things simple, keep it accessible, don't be too clever, you know, don't get involved in sort of what we call like intellectual masturbation. Do you know what I mean? Like just like showing off for the sake of it. Just give people the information in a way that they understand, not how you do.
How important is that, keeping things simple? I know you talk about that a lot in your book.
Well, massively, because, and it's not about assuming people are simple, it's the opposite. It's assuming people are smart. There's that great Leonardo da Vinci quote that says, simplicity is the ultimate in sophistication. Most people are clever if you give them information that they can receive, understand, digest, and therefore do something with. So think about all the stats that sort of hinder simplicity in our world. Think about how many of us have got mobile phone devices somewhere close to us these days because we feel we need to be connected. Now, what we know is the stats say that you get interrupted 37 times every 60 minutes during a working day by that mobile phone device. Now, if you get tripped up just one of those 37 times, and then once every under 2 minutes, constantly somebody asking you for your time, your attention, it takes you 22 minutes to get your levels of concentration back to where they were before you picked up the phone. So there's a condition known as ADT, attention deficit trait, which is different from attention deficit disorder. But it says that attention deficit trait, which is basically being overloaded by information, reduces your IQ levels by between 15 and 20%. So I'm sure you've had those experiences of walking around school sometimes and thinking, is it just me, or is common sense not common practice? And the frustration is often because people are too connected. They're trying to do too much. They're trying to receive too much information rather than just focus on just do your job, just do the simple things. So it's absolutely essential. And that's why, to go back to this idea of trademark behaviours, and I've mentioned it a few times, when I go and work with teams, I say, what are the 3 non-negotiable behaviours that we have to sign up to? Any more than 3. And I talk about behaviours as opposed to values as well. Because again, the language is simple. If I talk about values, that's abstract. What is a value? Define a value for me. Well, it's difficult because a value is personal, it's deep, it's intrinsic, probably related to your own background and your own history. So all you need to do, if I go into a school and start saying, what are our school values, is just sit in the room and nod and go, yeah, oh yeah, I agree with that. Whereas if I go into a school and say, what are our non-negotiable behaviours? Well, now I can see whether you believe it or not whether you nod in a room. I have to watch you. Are you engaging with the children? Do you treat people with kindness and decency? Are you interested in other people? I can observe those as behaviours. So you can't hide. A value allows people to hide in a culture. A behaviour smokes you out and says, demonstrate it.
I like that because I noticed in your book you talk about waffle in mission and visions, and schools are massive for putting out missions and visions, and you can go into a school and see it within a day whether they live and breathe it. What would be
100%.
your advice there to set up a really solid mission and vision for a department or an organisation?
Oh, brilliant question. I would go in and first of all, so you think of 3 questions. Why are we here? What does success look like, and how are we going about achieving it? Is the simple ways. So, like Lewis was really good there at articulating. Well, why are you doing this podcast? And you'll have to remind me of the exact words, but it was about where we want to help other people educate themselves or something like.
Yeah, be better educators, be better humans is our line that we live and breathe.
Brilliant, yeah, right. So whilst I wasn't able to remember it, but I bet I could after a little while of working with you. Do you know what I mean? Because it's simple. It's a succinct statement of this is why we're doing this. What does success look like on it? Well, look at what you described to me about what success looks like on this, that you've been doing blogs and then you've branched out to do a website. Now you've got the podcasts that you're doing, and we were talking off air and said you don't know where it's going to go to. So success is constantly fluid, but you're constantly thinking about how do we make that difference in different mediums, and then you have some really clear behaviours of right. So what are the non-negotiable behaviours when we deal with people? What are the 3 behaviours that are going to define any interaction with either Alan or yourself, Lewis. And then you can call each other out and equally call each other in of, oh, I like the way that you listen there, I like the way you engaged, or equally, I felt you could have been a bit more empathetic, or whatever it is. You've then got a framework in which people know what they're signing up to. So you think about how many, you go into cultures, and I think what often kills a culture, or what leads to underperformance, is ambiguity, because it's all subjective. You go, well, what are the rules of the game? Like as sports teachers, if you're going to play a game, you need to tell people what the rules are before they set off and play it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise you'll have somebody picking up the ball and running it, and somebody just thinking you're only allowed to kick it. It becomes, and it quickly descends into a farce. And in a department or a team, if you can say, listen, let's be really clear, we're here because we want to make a difference to children's lives. Success of that is that we're going to look at how many kids still keep coming back and playing, even if they're not the best athletes or in the best school team. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to value every child, we're going to nurture their potential, and we're going to introduce fun to it. I'm making this up off the top of my head. But then that way, but then that way, you've got teachers that go, well, that's not for me because I want to be in an environment where it's about winning and being the best. And you go, okay, that's fine. That doesn't make you a bad person. But what it suggests is, this isn't going to be the environment where you're going to be happiest. Yeah. You know, and rather than fall out along the journey where we feel like we've got different objectives, let's be really clear what the rules of this game is going to be. And then you have a choice. And when you make a choice, then, if you listen to the definition of the word commitment says you make a choice. You go, I want to be a part of that. And a commitment culture is always seen as when people talk about high performance culture, they're describing commitment cultures, and that's where people have made a choice. And you can only make an informed choice when you know what the rules of the game you're signing up to are.
So to be in a commitment culture and to create a commitment culture, if I'm listening to you rightly, you need to have those three things of why are we here, the success and what does that look like and how to achieve it. And to take away that ambiguity has to be behaviour based around what does that actually look like or feel like or sound like, and what will you see as you're a part of that team or as a leader of that team or as a child working with that team.
100%. So, like, and again, I'll refer to one of the interviews we did on the podcast you were describing, that we sat down with Mauricio Pochettino at his house. And again, one of the questions we ask is about your non-negotiable behaviors. And he again, these guys can articulate it because he said, one is you bring positive energy to every environment. One, you come at this with an attitude of willing to learn. And then the third one is you put the team first. And he says to people, he describes it as the Fifo Effect. So the Fifo Effect is fit in or fuck off. That's the simple choice, which was the words he used. But then what he did say was, but if you choose to take the FO option, so it doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that this isn't the right environment for you. But equally, there might be another environment where you're going to thrive. Yeah. So for you, why would you want to be in an environment that's going to affect your potential to perform as well as you can? So let's just be really clear from the start and then give people the chance. But then if you agree that you wouldn't have fit into that culture, you're also accepting that you're going to be held to account to deliver it.
So in many ways, he's putting the person first by accepting that maybe not everybody will follow what he wants to achieve or how he wants to do it. But at the same time, being holistic enough to say, listen, if it doesn't work here, go somewhere else. It's nothing personal. Let's not get personal about it. It's just not going to fit in.
Yeah, and I've seen that with the best coaches. They're also the best at getting rid of people because they put the person first. And it's not about, I don't think you're good. It's like, I do think you're good, but I think what you would out of an environment isn't aligned to what we're trying to deliver. And therefore, for you to go and be the person that you're capable of, a different environment is what you need to do. And how can I help you get there? Because I want to see you thrive, but I just don't think you're going to thrive here. Like, just having that complete removal of ambiguity and that complete honesty is the start of how you develop a great culture. Because then what happens with that is people then start holding each other to account. The best cultures, then, this is that phrase, cultural architects. You just get other people holding each other to account and, hey, that's not acceptable. That's not what we do here. That's not what we signed up to. And I've seen you speak to that kid in that way. And that's really not what we're doing. Is there a better way you could have done it? How powerful is that when you've got your own peer group holding you to account for it?
Yeah,
and that's what you mean by that term, cultural architects, isn't it? That as a leader, you don't necessarily have to do it yourself. There should be people in the culture that understand those expectations, those behaviours, that realise that the ambiguity isn't there, and that pull up people that maybe don't meet those standards, right?
Well, all the best cultures have these cultural architects. So, because as a leader, you can't be everywhere. So the question is, what's going on when you're not in the room? So you need then people that just really identify with it, that go, you know what, I don't need a position of leadership but this speaks to the person I am. And therefore, if I see somebody behaving counterintuitively to that, I'm not just prepared to turn a blind eye to it. I'll just say to you, hey, come on, we're better than that. So again, one of the examples that I've loved doing, being a United fan, is on the podcast, we've interviewed Solskjaer, Robin Van Persie and Rio Ferdinand. And that's been my area of interest of, when you were successful, why was that the case? And all of them will talk about the power of cultural architects. Rio Ferdinand said, you know what? He said, I would call people out. He said, I was brutal, but I was brutal about the behaviours, not the person, which I thought was a really key distinction. He said, I'd challenge your behaviours and I'd tell you that those behaviours were acceptable, but I wasn't saying it was you as a person. It was your behaviour, because his point was, you can change and adapt your behaviours. You can't necessarily change the person you are. And I'm not asking you to do that, but I'm asking, so they had 3 behaviours at Manchester United. The 3 behaviours that they define their culture: relentlessness was the first one. You never settle. We win a trophy, we start planning for the next one. We win a game, we go for the next one. We score a goal, we go for the next goal. You never settle on what you've got. The second one was about, you play to win, not play not to lose. So it's this idea of, we come out with positive intent, that we want to impose ourselves. And then the third behaviour is courage. You have to have so one of Alex Ferguson's great phrases was, I'm not interested in the guy that wants the ball when we're 5-0 up at home. Courage to him was the guy that's asking for the ball when you're getting beat 1-0 in the last minute. It's about moral courage, not just physical courage. And they were the 3 non-negotiables that said, you want to be part of this culture, that's what you're signing up to. And if that doesn't appeal to you, maybe you have to go somewhere else.
Love that. I don't know which bit I like the most, the fact that those 3 non-negotiables were so well articulated, or the fact that there's a Man United fan in Manchester.
Oh, come on, you're better than that, Lewis. That's but that's the interesting thing that I found on my journey. All high-performing cultures can articulate them. They'll be able to tell you quite quickly, this is the rules of the game. This is what we're playing.
Yeah. Okay, we'll start to wind it in, Damian. I know you're a really busy man. We'll do a little bit of quick fire like you do on your podcast. We talked about non-negotiables there. What are your 3 non-negotiables?
Oh, wow. Okay. First one is kindness. So go into any environment and be kind, and that's be kind to yourself, be kind to other people. So come at it from a place of that. Second one is about humility and curiosity. So it's the same thing, really, that humility says you accept that there's lots of things you don't know, and the curiosity is, so go and ask and try and find out on it. Yeah. And then the third one is, can you make a positive difference? So if you think, again, you were kind enough to invite me on here, and I recognised that you were trying to make a positive difference, and it was like, well, if I can help contribute to that, it's a no-brainer. Of course, I'd like to help you. So yeah, they're the 3: kindness, curiosity, or humility and curiosity, and make a positive difference. You know, make sure that your presence. So there's a great phrase I like that says, if your presence doesn't make if your presence doesn't make an impact, your absence won't make a difference. So it's almost that idea of bring something to the environment that you feel can make a difference.
Yeah, that's a great one. What book are you reading at the minute, Damian? Are you reading at the minute? Is there anything that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I love reading. It's sort of like one of my life's passions. When my girlfriend, she's now my wife, met me, she said I was a secret geek, because she didn't have a clue that I was such a geek that I love reading. Yeah. The book, I've been working on an idea for a book based on the podcast series, so I've been pretty much knee deep in the research for that at the moment. But I've recently finished a book last week called Stop Reading the News by a guy called Rolf de Belly, which I think is especially opposite given the sort of corona crisis and what's going on there. It's just, it's only a small book, but it's just basically an advocation of why you should stop bothering to read the news, because the news will find you. The bits that are relevant to you, you'll discover it without having to search it out.
Right.
Nice.
And, last one.
Go on.
Go on, ask him, Alan. Ask him, Alan.
Three leaders you'd like to go out for a meal with. They can be dead or alive. It don't matter. Who's your 3 guys you'd like to go out with?
Oh,
girls.
wow,
All girls.
What a belting question. Yeah, I love that. What a belting question. First one, I'm going to go Matt Busby.
Okay.
Right. And I love anyone like him. That like, you could choose any of them. Jock Steen, Bill Shankly, Bob Paisley, any of those, Alf Ramsey, like any of those sort of football characters that, like the death of Jack Charlton this week. I always find it quite evocative that, I mean, they were a bit before my time, but I just like those visionaries, people that came in and laid down the foundations for institutions that are still going. So like Matt Busby spoke about, the whole purpose of Manchester United was, he said, we're here to entertain the people that work in the mills and the factories and do miserable jobs during the week, and our job is to entertain them. And he was clear about, you do that with style and a flair, and do you know what I mean, you bring young players through. And I just thought he was a visionary, that those principles don't go out of fashion. So I'd love to sit down with somebody like him. Second one, I'd probably go for, he's not a leader, but he's somebody, we were talking about this on the podcast the other week about who would we like to invite on. And Jake was coming out with like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. And I went, I'd like to get Brian Keenan in. And he was like, who the fuck's Brian Keenan? And I went, and I love it, right? When he was a Beirut hostage. So in the late 1980s, he got captured. He was in Beirut, and he basically got held as a hostage for 5 years. And he wrote a book, right? I remember reading it in the early 90s. And there's very few books that have had such a profound impact on me that I go back and read it every couple of years. And his book was called An Evil Cradling. And I just found the way he was able to articulate the power of the human spirit just so moving. I find it beautiful. It's bleak but beautiful. And it's basically, this is a guy that's been locked in a cell on his own for 5 years. He eventually had somebody that they threw in with him. But he was there. He had no knowledge of why he was there, and had no knowledge if he was ever going to be let out again. And yet he retained this spirit for life, and he like his own authenticity, that he wouldn't be cowed by them. And I just think, go and interview him, because it's a journey in, rather than think about external things. This is a man that's had to go as deep into yourself as you're ever going to go, and found out some truths that I just think I'd love to sit with him and just talk to him about that.
Oh.
And then the third one, who would I go for now? I'm going to be biased there, and I'll give you a bit of a reason. I'd love to get my dad in there. Yeah. And I've shared a bit about him, but my dad's got advanced dementia these days and been suffering for it for a few years. So I miss him in that regard. You know what I mean? He's still with us, but he's sort of retreating into himself more and more. And I think as you get older, I said to you, we do me search, and there's so many questions I wish I'd have asked him. I wish I'd have tried to understand a bit more than I got the chance to do. So he'd be my third one.
Yeah, that's lovely. That really nice.
Yeah, brilliant, Damian.
Yeah, thank you.
And all the best to your old man in fighting. And thank you very, very much to you for coming on. Really appreciate your time, and I found it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you for asking me. I said to you a few times that I really admire the impact that you guys are trying to have, and I've no doubt you'll get to your school in Riyadh, and yours was in
KL in Malaysia,
in Malaysia. So I've no doubt you'll get there, and just your passion, your curiosity, and your willingness to make a difference, has got to be a positive impact for any school lucky enough to have you. So thank you for inviting me to come and chat with you.
Top man, Damian, and we'll keep tuning into High Performance Podcast. It's well worth a listen.
Yeah, dude. There's one that comes out this week. I'll tell you. There's two that actually for schools, I reckon it'll be perfect for you if you want. So just to flag it up, I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
There's one coming out next week with the principal lead dancer from the Royal Ballet called Marcelino Sambay. That's phenomenal. That I don't understand ballet. I wasn't aware of his story. His story was incredible. He shared it with us. That was amazing. So he's a lad that born in the slums of Lisbon. His dad died when he was 5, so he was put into care, and then they discovered he had this talent to dance, and he came out as gay when he was 16. He moved to England, came out as gay, and he's the first black principal dancer for the Royal Ballet. But he's a guy that is just, honestly, like the goosebumps came up. I asked him a question. I said, if I saw you dance in the ballet, what would I see? And he said, I'd take that 5-year-old boy from the slums on the stage with me, and I'd just dance with freedom. Oh, and it was like, whoa. Like,
didn't expect that one.
Yeah. And then the other one was, we interviewed a lady called Dame Evelyn Glenny. Now, I don't know when this interview will come out, but she's got an amazing story. She was born north of Aberdeen, and she lost her hearing. She was a talented musician, but at the age of 8, she started to have problems. So at the age of 12, she became deaf. And she said she was blessed by the school that she went to, because the school she went to had a belief that every child had their own story, and it was their job to help them tell it. And she said, and when she lost her hearing, her music teacher said to her, he said, you can still be a musician. And she said, I can't, I'm deaf. And he went, you don't need to be able to hear to be a musician, but you do need to be able to listen. And he said, what he did was, he said, go and stand against that wall there. She put her hand on the wall and he banged the drum. And he went, can you feel it? And she said, she could feel the vibrations in the wall. And he went, right, so you can listen. We can still play music. So she taught herself to play in her bare feet. So she plays through the vibrations in the floor. Wow. Now, she's the world's leading solo percussionist. That, if you remember the opening ceremony for the 2012 Olympic Games, she opens it by playing the steel drums. It's her, it's Dame Evelyn Glenny. She's one of the world's leading musicians, and most people don't know who she is. But there's a real powerful message there about the power of education to change a child's life. That, again, I'd really encourage. It's worth listening to, because I think you'll be able to make some themes from it, I'm sure.
Brilliant. For sure, we'll be listening to that. And thanks again for coming on, Damian, and a couple of tips there for listeners to tune into High Performance Podcast. It's well worth a listen. Guys, please search Infinite Leaders Live on YouTube and IGTV and on your podcast platforms. We are on all popular podcast platforms now, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And again, we've got all the kind of rambles and articles and journal notes and everything that you want to find on www.theinfinitelearners.com. Damian, thanks again, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks,
Look forward to it. Thanks, lads.